So we're waiting on Bill then?
No, Bill has just logged on.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Hi, Bill.
How are you? Hello. I got my stuff.
Fine, thank you. How are you? It's been a while.
Okay, Tanya, I think that's everybody, and feel free to go ahead and kick us off whenever you feel like doing so.
Absolutely. Okay, we're ready to get started. Brandon, would you like to open us with the COVID information, please?
Yes, thank you. So just a few notes for our meeting procedures, some guidelines to ensure compliance with the Kansas Open Meetings Act during COVID-19 provisions. Board members and other meeting participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various city staff members are present in person, and we must also state our names. This is, for the record, Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. All motions need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. The agenda for the meeting provided instructions for how to submit public comment. We have no written comment posted to the agenda, but we do have two community members I see joining us so far on Zoom. We do have no members in the chamber this evening. And just to note that our revised meeting protocol, COVID related, does require that any person attending in person wear a mask while doing so. And that's why Major McKinley and I are both wearing our masks this evening. So finally, the chair will call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options. Staff will present or will direct any speaker to the podium who may be here at the time. I want to remind everybody, finally, to just mute themselves when they are not speaking. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. This is Chair Salvini. We're ready to go ahead and get started with the meeting. Before we get started, I'd really like to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, please. My name is Tanya Salvini, I'm the chair.
I'm Jenny Robinson. Oh.
Good, Jenny, go. Yeah.
I'm Jenny Robinson, board member. I'm a social worker in the community.
Very good. Bill?
Marie Taylor, board member. I'm an attorney.
Very good, thank you. Bill?
Bill Gray, Bill, board member.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member, an anthropologist.
Okay. Okay, very good. Mishra? Mr. Mishra?
Sanjay Mishra, board member.
Ooh. I think I cut out a little bit. Sanjay, did you have a chance to introduce yourself?
Yes, I did, Tanya. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay. All right. Brandon?
Yes, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire.
And Lieutenant?
This is Major Trent McKinley with the Lawrence Police Department.
I'm sorry, Major McKinley. Thank you.
We're all still getting used to it.
Okay, I am so sorry. I'm like a few months behind. So again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, and okay, very good. Thank you. We'll go ahead and go to agenda item or letter A, excuse me, approval of minutes from the April 22nd meeting.
Jane Gibson, board member. I move we approve the April 22nd minutes.
Jim Mishra, second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Chair Gibson, or I'm sorry, Board Member Gibson, and seconded by Board Member Mishra. Any discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor signify with aye, and opposed.
Board Member
Excuse-
Robinson, I just had a quick question.
Sure.
If I wasn't present for that meeting, should I abstain from the voting on the minutes, or can I vote to approve them?
Many people abstain, but usually if they weren't present at the meeting, is that correct, Brandon?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it. Okay, any other discussion or questions? All those in favor signify with aye. All those opposed?
Tanya?
Yes.
I had
Yeah.
a comment.
Yes.
If Jenny reviewed the meeting on the video, then there's no reason for her to abstain unless she just wants to.
Okay, both reviewed it on the video and read the minutes certainly as well. Okay, Jenny, your choice. Okay, all those in favor signify with aye, all those opposed nay. And again, abstain is another option. So Board Member Gibson,
Aye.
Board Member Graybill.
Board Member Graybill abstain. I wasn't here. I
Mhm.
wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Board Member Mishra,
Board Member Mishra, aye.
Board Member Robinson,
Board Member Robinson, I reviewed the meeting. Aye.
and Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, aye.
And Chair Salvini, aye. We have 5 that say yes to the approving the minutes and 1 abstention. And then 1 absence in Littleton. Okay. All right, very good. Moving ahead, we'll go to public comments, letter B on the agenda. And we do have Mr. Kerr and Mr. Watts present. Would either of you like to speak?
Madam Chair, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I do see Mr. Kerr raising his hand. Speak.
So I have a question for the chair, because I haven't looked at the agenda today. Has there been any changes to it, like ordinance wise? Like, is there talking about ordinance today? Has that changed? No. So I could talk about the word.
Right. No, we're not talking about the ordinance at this meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Kerr, we'll be discussing, we'll
Citygate.
spend some time doing some post work on the Citygate Associates study.
Okay. So I have, okay. I was making sure. Well, mine is
Okay.
about the ordinance. Okay. And then-
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Very
yeah.
good. Okay,
Um,
thank you.
So let me pull that up.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, hello, good evening. I'm Alex Kerr. So I have somewhat of an idea I'd like to share with this board about the ordinance, and I think it'd be very helpful to the people of Lawrence, Kansas. And remember, this is just an idea, and I think it'd be a good idea and something that we could actually celebrate or say that that this board actually did it and have fun with it. So my idea would be that this board could create maybe a summary of the ordinance and get key points of the ordinance, and then on like a one paper page, and the board would just really just have to share it with everybody. online and at hotspots at the city in the city. So let me tell you why I think of that idea. Because, yeah. So I talk with people in the city that really are not community members or focus on this government, but I still speak with them. And I talk to them about this ordinance draft that this board has. And really, they don't really know what the ordinance is. So, and I wanted to remind advise this board, that if people don't know about it, it's not the biggest know about this ordinance. It's not the biggest deal, really. It's just a small fraction. But I want this board to know that if people don't know about this board won't get everything the public wanted, and that's from me, coming from me, because they just didn't know about this ordinance. Trust me, this board won't get everything that the public wanted because they just didn't know about. The public just didn't know about this. Everybody in the city has something to say, I should say, about this ordinance. Some people may not care, but there is something. This ordinance is a big thing and something that is time consuming. But here's the real thing. I have a lot of concern. I lost my place. That this board isn't getting enough. The public is not getting your face though. I have a lot of concern about this board because it's not getting the public more informed about this ordinance. And it's really, I really think that this board needs to realize that if the public doesn't know anything about this, it's not a real big thing, but it is a thing, and it's something that this board should realize when doing this and doing in the steps to creating this ordinance. And I want to make this publicly. I was not at the April meetings for personal reasons. But I would actually like to hear from board members, even though this is a general public comment. But here's the thing: I would like to hear from board members about this in the near future, just because I really do think that the board members should say something about this and respond. So that's all I have tonight. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Really appreciate your comments. I do want to draw to your attention the shaded area under public comments, where as a general rule, we'll not discuss or debate the items that are presented. However, what you've presented to us does, we have heard what you've said and will certainly be noted in further conversations when we do specifically discuss the ordinance. Thank you. Mr. Watts?
Hi, appreciate being here tonight. You know, in all bluntness, this board has become rather lackluster in what it's producing. You've had over a year to work on this, and you started off with gangbusters. It went off really well initially, but you have allowed yourselves to be watered down and mired in "we've always done it this way-itis" by a bunch of $100,000 a year bureaucrats. Now, all of you in this group are making $100,000 a year, except Ms. Robinson. I understand that you don't think that's a lot of money, that you just think you're regular. You having fun there, Ms. Gibson? You're one of the ones that turned this into an academic exercise for your resume. I hope that you understand that what goes on here in Lawrence in relation to this board, you have a great deal to say with. I don't know why you've taken a back seat other than your own sense of fears. Let's see what happens. We're going to be discussing a little bit of this Citygate report, and I have some comments on that a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Okay, are there any more members that have arrived in the audience? Brandon?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, no. I believe that's all the public comment for this evening.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to agenda item C. And that would be the discussion of the Citygate Associates Study of the Lawrence Police Department and preliminary planning discussion on recommendations related to the Police Community Review Board. If you don't have access to the report, if you could please call that up, that would be great. I will be probably referencing particular pages and sections as we're going forward. But if you could take some time and do that, that would be great. And also hope you had a chance to either sit in on the May 25th session or had a chance to go and view the video or listen to the session and certainly read the report. I think what we want to do before we get started is just have an open discussion in response to what you did learn from Citygate Associates Study and their presentation. And yeah, and just leave it at that. The floor is open for just a conversation. Then we'll move to some specific spots in the report.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. If somebody will help me out here, for whatever reason, I've got a limited view here. So Sanjay, thank you so much.
And Mr. Board Member, so I don't know how we want to start, but when I look the comment from, I can go into what I think about the report later. The comment about the board and the police department working in parallel and at odds, loggerheads with each other. I wanted to hear Major McKinley, what he thought about that statement.
Yes, this is Major Trent McKinley with the Police Department. You know, a lot of the things that were put out as conclusions from the Citygate report, I did not have access to the raw materials that they used to assemble that and come to certain conclusions. When certain statements were made in that report, it did cause us to question ourselves where some of the things had come from. In speaking with the assistant city manager, he had a little bit more insight, but I do understand that Citygate engaged a wide variety of employees throughout the organization. I think some employees, such as our line level employees, may not have been very involved with things that were going on with the board. So I think some things we just don't have a good, I think all members of our organization are not engaged with the board yet. And I think as time goes on, as we start to do some of the things that we talked about as far as community events and bringing both the board members in touch with all of our officers throughout the organization and with community members as well, I think we're going to all have a much better understanding of one another. And so I guess that's my best answer. Again, some of those things that were published as conclusions in the report, I had to question myself because I don't have the information either.
Okay.
Sanjay, you're muted.
Sanjay, did you want to
No,
reply?
I wanted to say thank you to Major McKinley because I thought we had worked together very cooperatively, and like people down the line in the police department have not engaged with us. Scores what? Thousands, tens of thousands of citizens have not engaged with us, as Alex has aptly pointed out. So we cannot take that. And now I wanted to jump into the conversation about this report. I am amazed that somebody accepted this report. These people talk to 100 people out of 100,000. And then they are trying to put a fight between the board and the police department. 44 emails, 100 people, and they come to conclusions. I am amazed.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. Jane, I believe you had your hand up. I saw Marie, and then I saw Bill. Jane?
Well, I was going to support what Major McKinley said. It was apparent to me, and others may disagree, that that Citygate spent most of its time assessing the police department and didn't really understand very much about our process. They didn't understand very much about what our board was doing or how we got where we are now, because we weren't working at odds or in parallel. We were, in fact, if anything, in series, in response to the original draft of the ordinance. So I don't think that they understood how we got where we are today. And I think I'd have to say that Sanjay's right on point, that they drew some pretty grand conclusions with very little basis. I don't know what their sample size was, and I hope someone will ask when they talk about, for example, the view of the police department by the community. How many people did they actually talk to? And is it a self-selected sample? I don't, did they talk about the limitations of their methodology to help us know what we could trust and what we could not trust about this study? So I think that, that they made a good faith effort in a difficult time to try to reach a lot of people, but I don't think they did reach very many people. And I think their conclusions are difficult to support when it comes to the views of the police department by the community, or the relationship between the police department and our board. That was my view.
Okay, thank you, Jane. We'll move to Marie, and then we'll go to Bill, and then back to Sanjay.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So I, in terms of my impression of the report, I think part of it was not fully understanding the charge that was given to the board back in June. So we had some pretty clear guidelines about what the expectation was from our city commission, and we're an advisory board, so we went to work on trying to deliver partly what was issues that board members had found over time, but also with some direction from city commission on what they expected from the ordinance. And so we had a charge, and we were working through that charge. Then I think they also had some assumptions about where we were in the process, as if we make our suggestions on what changes there should be, and then it's a fait complete, that there'd be no other process for feedback from even the police association. I mean, I fully expected that this was an opportunity for our board to gather our ideas on what should be in the ordinance. But then when it got through to city commission and they were considering it, they would also then be tapping in for that kind of feedback from the department, from the police association. So it was to me,
Your stakeholders.
Other stakeholders. It was a phased approach, and that we were the beginning of the phase. But I did not expect that we would turn this over to the city commission, and within 2 weeks, a month, they would just rubber stamp it. I did not expect that to happen. So I think that they're kind of thought perhaps that we were further along in the process in terms of getting stakeholders involved, involving the department, involving their police association. So I just felt like that aspect was not addressed. So I take their comments about a work group as something that could have happened and probably would have happened, but further down in the process. But that this space was for us to come together to gather our own ideas and our own reflections on what we thought the ordinance should contain, but not a finished product by any means.
Very good, thank you. Bill, Board Member Bill?
This is Board Member Graybill. When I read that report, I was a little surprised at what they said, and also very disappointed. The reconstituted board started about 3 years ago. For 2 years, we really didn't do anything. And finally, Board Member Gibson came forward and said, we need to do something. I mean, we're just sitting here for 2 years. And we started the process of this new ordinance. that wasn't done lightly. That took a lot of work on a lot of people's part, took a lot of time. The police department was asked to participate in that. They had a representative at every meeting I've ever been to. They've had access to all of the material that was proposed to this committee, including the proposed ordinance. It was discussed and reviewed by the city legal department. City staff offered no help one way or the other. They simply said nothing really. So now for this Citygate to come in and say, oh, this is basically, you shouldn't have done this because it's divisive and let's start all over. I just have one more meeting left, so I guess I'm a lame duck, but it would be my hope that this committee doesn't give up on what you've been working on and forges ahead with it. If the city commission does not care for the ordinance, they'll throw it out. That's what they're there to do. I just can't see starting all over. It's been a long time, and I hope you all hold the line. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, Chairperson. This is Chair Salvini, excuse me. Thank you, Board Member Graybill. Let's go to Board Member Mishra.
So this is Board Member Mishra. And back to Jane's point, on page 25, Jane, in the report, the paragraph above section 2.1.1, they had their disclaimer. This is not statistically valid, and all those things are in there in that paragraph. So basically what they're saying is everything they are saying is hearsay, if you go by that. And it's just like the survey that we did, is people who are most involved, it's a bipolar survey, and people who are most involved are saying, yes, this must be. People who have other views are saying this mustn't be. And so that's what we are hearing from Citygate. And they have talked to, or at least maybe they have summarized, they have taken a look at the 370 or many comments that we received and looked at that also. But they have a very small sample on which they are working. So I would be very cautious. And back to Bill's point, a lot of work has gone into this, collaborative work has gone into this, and we cannot abandon this on the advice of Citygate. We must plow forward.
Thank you, Board Member. This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Mishra. Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. I don't think we have to abandon it. In fact, I don't think that they even say we have to abandon it. I do think that there were a couple of important, probably more than two, but two things that I thought were important in their comments on the CPRB, and it's embedded in the CPRB section. It's about internal affairs and the importance of the police departments being transparent with the board about the complaint and investigation process. And that's information that we've asked for. And I think that would be very helpful for us to understand better how the police department is conducting those complaints and how they're carrying out the investigation. I mean, how they receive complaints and how they're carrying out investigations. And the other thing they said that I thought was, and I think this is just echoing what Marie said, is that we need to have that conversation with representatives of the police department, getting feedback on this proposed ordinance. I mean, the way that I see this process, is that we received the first ordinance, the one that created this board, and it was actually produced not by community members, but by the police department with Maria Gonzalez, a staff member who in fact was married to and probably is still married to a police officer. So I would consider that, an ordinance that was drafted by the police department effectively. And our ordinance is a response to that, which is, an appropriate thing for this board to do, is to look at that first ordinance and say, well, this is how, after a year of working with that, and this is what we see it needs to do to make the board useful in the way that the city commission envisioned, or as I understood the way the city commission envisioned the way the board would work. So I think that this next stage is an important one in which we can have a conversation with the draft. We've got community feedback, and there's some things there that we probably want to address. And we're waiting on the staff to give us their analysis of the gaps, the contradictions, problems that we may have created, oversights. We're waiting on that analysis to happen. So I hope that's coming up pretty quick. But we need then to talk to the police department and hear from them, maybe line by line, what they see in this ordinance that works and what they see in this ordinance that doesn't. And I'd like to have that conversation with a mediator, because I don't know if Citygate is right or not, but it's always good to have somebody to help facilitate a conversation. And I think it would help us. It would improve our relationship with the police department and the police departments with the community, because this board is supposed to be representative of the community. That would be a useful exercise, in my opinion.
Very good. Thank you, Jane. I completely agree. And I think where you started is where, toward the end was where Marie left off too. And that is that this has been a very intentional, slow, deliberate effort to examine what the history and the pattern's been. And Bill, I agree. For 2 years, it was like the first year, we're just getting acclimated and going through a lot of training, and then starting to think about, well, what is our role? What's our responsibility? And I think the incidents in the nation that occurred a year ago certainly precipitated a lot of this, and did allow the city commission to examine this board and provide those charges as board member Taylor was talking about. And then for us to really roll up our sleeves and think about that within the ordinance, and then start the working groups. Again, we're a volunteer group. We meet once a month. We want to do our best, certainly, to represent community members and ourselves as community members as well. But I agree, Jane. I think we do roll up our sleeves and continue to work on this. I'll echo too that I was really disappointed to see some of the language that there is the lack of trust there. And I really was a little, it kind of shifted me a little bit, thinking, how did that happen? But I agree that we do need to think about what are our next steps forward and continue the work that certainly we've been doing. So I'm just echoing and summarizing what everyone's been saying for sure. So if I could turn your attention, and we certainly can continue on with comments, not to cut anyone off, but if you'll turn to page 193, excuse me, on the recommendations, and starting with recommendation number 71, take a moment to look at that. And, basically it suggests convening a work group of stakeholders, including certainly the Community Police Review Board, and then law enforcement officers. And I like your approach with a mediator, an objective person, Jane. It would, what you're talking about, and us talking through number 7 and 71, maybe create some of the results that you were talking about.
Jane Gibson, board member. Tanya, my document only it ends at page 132. You said page 190 something? Do I have the wrong?
193 gives recommendations. After
I have recommendations, but I have a different
Page 1112. Sorry to jump in. Page 1112.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I see those recommendations on page 132 of the document that's linked to this agenda.
I'm sorry. I have the full report up. I'm terribly sorry then. So it's still recommendation number 71, correct?
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just want to be sure we're all talking about the same thing.
I'm sorry. I'm on the original document. Sorry. Okay. So my question is still to you, Jane.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Tanya?
So what you were talking about getting the some stakeholders or the citizens review board together with law enforcement with a
mediator.
A mediator, exactly. Would that be part of recommendation 71?
Jane Gibson, board member, and if the working group is created and the CPRB is a part of that working group, I could see that could be a recommendation that the CPRB's representatives could make. That could satisfy 71. We would be a part of a working group. I don't know what the plan is here. Maybe there's another plan, but that's something that the CPRB, we can make our own recommendations, our own response to this report.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be as a part of that working group.
I think that's a good idea.
That's not really what I was talking about. I would have been content to have the CPRB meet with representatives of the police department directly with a mediator, but this seems to be another, and maybe that is a recommendation that would come out of the working group. I don't know. I see Marie's got her hand up.
Marie
Taylor, board member. We have not been given direction to form a working group or to take this recommendation and accept it. Mm-hmm. That's really for the city commission to give us that direction. So just to say that, this is from Citygate, but they're consultant for the city, not for our group. So we act based on what our advisory role is for the city commission. So I think we can't get ahead of ourselves on that. I know they wrote immediately, but they're not the it's so funny. They're not the
I know exactly where you're going.
Do I sound like a mother? Okay. So, and I also have concerns that if it can't be all of this, the review board, because then we have an open meeting and we're not going to get frank conversations, and no one from the department who's in these representative roles may feel comfortable being recorded, and then the next thing they know, they're in the paper. I mean, this is not an environment that supports invulnerability, right? I mean, in honest conversations necessarily. I mean, this is a barrier to get to that. So it's got to be some sort of. I know we have to talk to our assistant city manager about how best to frame this if this is what the city commission wants, because it's not an accepted direction yet.
Okay, very good. Board member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. I'm sure that Brandon is going to address this issue. I talked to two of the city commissioners, and that's why I was talking about a working group as though that were something that's going to happen, because I believe that is what they intend. But Brandon will need to tell us that if that's how it is. And if there is a working group, then that working group is directed apparently to produce a report with recommendations in 90 days. So by the end of August, and that would be our timeline. If that's what, if that's where we go, if that's, that seems to me, at least in my conversations with two city commissioners, that's what they intend.
Okay, very good. Let's pause here for a moment and ask Brandon. Brandon, since the presentation of the report, what has been the general discussion and or acceptance of the report or response to the report by the City Commission?
Yes, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a little bit of insight about that. So when the consultant presented the report, they at the end of their presentation, they recommended some next steps, and those are outlined, I think, in their report also. And that is to take each one of the recommendations, the findings and recommendations, and develop sort of a issue action plan, as I would have referred to it, which may be kind of bureaucratic speak, but that's what I guess a different term would be like an implementation plan. And so that's the work that city employees in the city manager's office and police department and some of our other teams are going to be working on for the majority of the recommendations. those that are directed more towards the police department, or those that are directed towards some of our partner agencies, our community partner agencies. And so we'll be developing a plan to be responsive to the recommendations. And as a part of that plan, we will contemplate systems of public engagement, which is a consistent finding throughout the report, that we lack good systems, good processes, good policies around public engagement. And so as myself, Major McKinley, Interim Chief Heffley, and others within the city organization work on developing the implementation plan, we'll do that with public engagement in mind. So that's the work we'll be doing over the next 90 days, coming back to the City Commission with our action plan in response to each one of these recommendations that lays out expectations for how we're going to be responsive. City staff is operating on the assumption that the Police Review Board does not would probably not want us to develop their action plan. I think, and we've kind of been operating on that assumption throughout the last year as the board has worked on the ordinance. This is your space. This is policy. This is your space. And the process that the board would like to undertake to develop a plan that's responsive to the recommendations is for the board's discussion. I would say, though, that I do believe Dr. Gibson's interpretation is accurate, that the City Commission is expecting a plan for how to respond to those recommendations specific to the Police Review Board. So I do believe that is the work before the board. And I want to reiterate, while I do have the mic, I'd just like to reiterate that city staff, we do stand, myself, Major McKinley, Lieutenant Ernst, Interim Chief Heffley, we all stand ready, and that also includes other city staff as well. I know Porter O'Neill, our city attorney's office staff, have been involved in assisting. We stand ready to help however the board would like. And I think that some of the recommendations about convening a work group with diverse stakeholders and a facilitator provides an opportunity for some of those direct internal stakeholders to the city organization. Sorry, I'm distracted by one of the videos. It provides opportunity for the direct stakeholders within the city organization to provide that support as the board works through some of the finer details of the ordinance. So we see it as a positive recommendation. I think it's something I feel optimistic about, and I think it does provide some good recommendation for process to get from where the board's at now with the ordinance to an ordinance that has broad community buy-in and stakeholder buy-in. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Sorry to be long-winded about that response.
Thank you, Brandon. Board Member Mishra?
This Board Member Mishra, point of clarification. Brandon, has the City Commission accepted the report formally?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. The City Commission did not vote. They received the consultant's presentation, and the expectation is to come back within 90 days with an action plan. So that's what the staff is working on. And again, our assumption is that the board would like to work on the action plan related to the recommendations specific to the board.
Okay. So basically what we are saying is, so this Board Member Sanjay Mishra, that the City Commission is wanting to act on the report, which is without accepting it, they have accepted it.
Yes, I do believe that is an accurate interpretation.
This is Chair Salvini, Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson, I don't think that's an accurate interpretation, at least not for the two city commissioners that I talked to. They want to review what they told me, and I've now had 3 conversations. They told me that they expect to get the 90-day report with recommendations, and that they will decide at that point which of the recommendations of Citygate, if any, they want to follow through on. And I assume that they will follow through on some. I think that they admired much about this report. but they don't feel at this moment bound to the report. It's not a binding report at all. Right now it's a series of recommendations, and they reserve judgment about what they think they need to do until they get the report with recommendations from the working group.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. If I use the word binding, I apologize. I certainly did not intend to give that impression. Dr. Gibson, I think you and I have the same interpretation, but your way of describing it is more effective than mine. And that's the work that the staff is doing, is not going through each one of the 75 recommendations and simply making technical changes. That's not what we're doing. We're developing an action plan that will then come back to the City Commission for their review and approval or correction on. That will be our plan for how we'll be responsive to these recommendations.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini, Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. Okay, this is just a question of semantics, but my understanding is that, I mean, even when you say you're developing an action plan, Brandon, that sounds like you're accepting the recommendations, and maybe you are. But my understanding is that we're not required to accept the recommendations. I mean, I want us to look at this report and to think carefully about it, but there are other things we also need to look at and think carefully about, such as the analysis of staff coming back to us for our gaps and loopholes and contradictions and conflicts and all the problems that we might have created in that ordinance, as well as, going back to the community survey that we did. We have a number of resources that we can rely on in our response, right? The idea of an action plan would, to me, suggest that what they recommend is what we should do. I don't know that we want to do that. I mean, maybe we do, but I don't think that we're bound to do that, is all I'm saying. So I think we're on the same page mostly, except for this problem of the action plan.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I just want to make sure I'm very clear, because many members of the public and stakeholders in the criminal justice system, as well as our own city employees, have a great deal of interest in what happens with the recommendations in this report. And I just want to make sure that I'm very clear that it's not our intent to go through and take a technical action to check off every box in this report until we develop a plan that receives the support of the City Commission and the stakeholders who are involved. So I just want to be very clear that I'm sorry if my comments are causing confusion for any of the board members, but we're not taking this plan and just going through and taking a technical action to implement every one of these things unilaterally. We will develop a plan that will provide for systems and processes of engagement with stakeholders and with the community. And we look forward to receiving the City Commission's feedback before we take action. So I apologize if my comments are confusing. I'm going to back out now and let the board have the floor for the rest of the meeting.
That's fine. Thank you for your input, Brandon. Did I see a hand up? I'm not sure I did. Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to look at those recommendations. I think at this point, it might be interesting for us to do a response to the recommendations while we continue the work that we're doing. I agree with Jane. I think we're waiting for some work that the city attorneys have been doing on the ordinance. I think that's going to be valuable information, folding in the work groups work from getting the responses from the community on the survey that was out there for a few months. And so how would you like to proceed? Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. I don't have an answer to that question, Tanya. I'm sorry. I feel the need for some clarification from the City Commission, because Brandon Brandon's understanding, which might be the right one, is that we are not to be a part of the working group. My communications with the city commissioners is that we are to be a part of the working group. One of them went so far as to say to be developing a set of or a plan, that relates to these recommendations. Without the CPRB would fly in the face of the spirit of having a CPRB in the first place. And I'm not arguing that we want to be a part of the working group. In fact, the idea that we would work on 70 recommendations that are not about us sounds really onerous to me. I just want to be sure that we're doing, we've spent a year on an ordinance that took us nowhere, that effectively made us nothing more than a public relations arm for the police department. And then we spent a year trying to improve that ordinance so that we can actually live up to the spirit of what the city commission said we should do. So whether or not we're a part of this working group, I want us to move on. I want us to put our energy into this this work that we've been doing now for the last year. And if we're to be a part of that working group, okay, but what I don't want to do is take some steps only to be told in a few weeks or a few months that we weren't doing what was expected of us. I just want us to know that we're taking the steps that we're supposed to be taking. Working group or no, we just need to know one way or another. And so I'm certainly, Brandon, I'm certainly not challenging your interpretation. I'm just suggesting that yours isn't the only one out there and that we need to be clear about that.
Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Taylor, then Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Ray Taylor. So on that recommendation, I think I want to make sure we're all understanding what they mean by working group. I think they're talking about something specific to that particular portion of the report that dealt with the Community Police Review Board. And they say in that when they describe who should be in it, they say consisting of the Police Review Board members. So I think they think that for that effort, that's just about the ordinance, that they do want us involved in that. And my concern is that then they've turned that into an open meeting and with all that entails. So I don't know if they have a full grasp of what that would mean when they were making that recommendation. Okay, so then in terms of like us continuing our work, I think that we are at a place where we are waiting for review from the city attorney's office on some aspects. So there is a somewhat of a natural break to then continue to work with the department if they have some comments that they would like to forward to us. I think there's nothing stopping them from developing within the department or with their police association a set of comments for us that based on what's already been produced by this board, and that we could also review and consider too, without having to have a working group. That could happen at any point. I don't know what to make of the comments about distrust or lack of trust when we have done nothing but ask questions about their processes that they told us they were doing. And then, so I don't understand that at all. So it must be just the fact that we're trying to carve out a role that has not existed before, which is bringing up concerns that we may be overstepping. But we haven't done those roles. So I think it's premature to even just if that's what that's getting at. But so that did raise a little bit of concerns for me, but that was more of just, I'm still digesting the report in that sense of those kinds of comments. Oh, and then just one final comment is that I think we have to be really careful that we get our direction from the full city commission. And because even if we start to talk to separate ones, we can also by not intentionally create a walking quorum. So we have to be really careful about that. You didn't. I just want to say 3 is fine, but we have to be real careful. And then it's also it's good for them to give us the direction, because I think we have a fan base, so to speak, who are also following this work closely.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Taylor. Let's go to Board Member Mishra, then Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So I echo Marie's concern that the trust distrust is the big issue. And that absolutely needs to be sorted out. But to Madam Chairman's point, how do we respond to the recommendations? I was focusing only on section 10, and section 10 has recommendation 71, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you look at 2, 3, 4, 5, they are very much in line with what we have been saying all along. Is they should do this, they should do this, they should follow it, make sure everything is transparent. So the only question is, what do we do about recommendation 71, which is form a working group to look at the ordinance, to look at what the CPRB should do. We have spent a year doing it. And if they want, if you think, if distrust or trust will be better built by bringing some of these additional partners of the community, I'm willing to spend time, invest time in doing that.
Thank you, Board Member Mishra. Board Member Robinson, and then Gibson.
Board Member Robinson. Yeah, reading this, I wasn't surprised at mention of trust and mistrust between the CPRB and the police department, because we've really been collaborating with leadership from the police department and not, getting feedback from officers on the street necessarily. So I think Marie's concern about creating an open meeting with this working group is really valid. And I think it's a great idea to get comments and feedback, if that's possible, from officers about the ordinance. I think we did get some feedback from officers in our surveys. But, as far as trust goes, it's important from my perspective as a social worker to have a partnership. However, we are the voice for community members ultimately, and they're who we're serving. And I also want to say, Tanya, Stephen and Brandon have had their hands up.
Sure. I think the protocol is, as soon as we're finished discussing, I think, is that correct, Brandon? I'm sorry. At the end of the agenda item, then we have public comment.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, that's correct. I only raised my hand just because I wanted to offer an apology for a misunderstanding.
Okay, so we see your hand. I want to recognize the hand up by Mr. Watts. And Mr. Watts, as soon as we wrap up, we will definitely hear your remarks. So Board Member Robinson, any other responses or comments?
So I think I'm a little muddled on what the expectation is regarding this work group. I think we all might be, but but getting feedback from the city on the ordinance definitely feels like the next logical step. Then I think it'd be really important if you all agree to get some feedback from officers, feedback from from other people just in the department as well.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Robinson. Board Member Gibson, then Board Member Taylor.
Jane Gibson, Board Member. This question of trust it's an important one, but I believe that the issue of trust was asserted by Citygate without a sufficient basis. And so I don't trust that assertion about trust. I have to say that. And in fact, when Marie and I were in our listening session with Citygate, I can't remember the guy's name, but his assertion in that moment was, he said, "So of course you don't trust the police." And I was floored that he would make such an assertion, and certainly nothing that Marie or I said should have led him to that conclusion. And I corrected him in that moment, and I said, that's not a fair assessment. I don't know exactly what my words were, but I pointed out to him that the problem that we have is that we have no data at all. Not that we have a reason to distrust the police or a reason to celebrate the police. We just don't know anything because we have no data either way. And so when Citygate makes such a claim like that without a basis, I hate for it to get all this airtime, because I think that there are police officers who are very skeptical about what we can do. And I think Jenny's right. There's no way for us to know exactly who filled out those surveys. But it looks to me too, Jenny, that there were police officers who were probably with friends and family members filled out the survey, because the language was the same for a number of those, and they were expressing mistrust of the CPRB. But that doesn't describe the whole police department any more than our community survey describes the whole community. It doesn't. It's a self-selected sample, and we have to be aware that Citygate took this self-selected sample and made these really extreme conclusions, out of that. And I would not want us to act on that. I want us to act in good faith. I think that the police department will act in good faith, and that's how we move forward. Not by assuming that we have, this dangerous mistrust between us and we can't talk. My suggestion of a mediator isn't because of the fact of a mistrust that might be there or might not be there, but because it's always good to have a facilitator when you're having a conversation like this one. We're trying to reconcile different views of what is best for this community, right? And a mediator is a good person to do, but not because we necessarily have this issue of trust. So, okay, I'll shut up. Also, Marie's right about making this a public conversation. We won't get anything frank or obvious if the cameras are on, and we need to have a frank and open conversation.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Gibson, Chair Gibbs, or I'm sorry, Board Member Gibson. Marie Taylor. Thank you.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So I want to just remind us where we were in this process of reviewing this ordinance, because what they're saying is not too different from what could have happened as we were progressing. But I don't think what we've done is wrong, because we were finding our voice. We were debating, amongst even ourselves, what we thought it should be. We were gathering information from community members on what we had produced already. And so I don't think there was really a space for that to say, let's now make some concessions with the department that builds the trust that they find lacking. I mean, we needed to go through this process of developing what we think is the ideal from our conversations and our experiences and who we've talked to in the community, and gathering the survey data that we were able to gather. So it's all reflective of what we've produced so far and what we're still working on, because we're still digesting the comments that we received from that survey that we put out. So I think it would have been too soon in the process to then sit down and start making changes based on what the department wanted to see in the ordinance at this point, right? I mean, that would have been premature to our efforts. But I also want to say that what we've done so far in this ordinance, we all looked at different communities, different cities, how they had structured their police review boards. What we did is not earth-shattering, right? I mean, it was in line with best practices from different cities that we've seen. So it's not like a new invention in terms of what these boards are doing. And we saw even in the literature that we're reviewing is that there's always some friction and conflict when you have a review committee that's looking over the shoulder of government actors, right? So I think that we can't solve that problem, but we cannot say that we don't have a right to have a review board that looks into complaints, even if it makes them feel like they're being watched, because that is our function. And so I can't solve that for them. If that was really what this is, that trust issue is getting at, that you don't trust us, well, we don't trust you, maybe, in some of these instances, right? So, yeah, what I saw in the ordinance matched up with what a lot of communities are doing. So if anything, the one that we have is least popular, where you review appeals from complaints. right? So that is that's anomalous in what we observe from other cities.
This is Chair Salvini, Board Member Mishra, and then I've got a couple of comments.
You want to go first, Tanya?
Sure. I would really love to acknowledge and nod my head completely at what Marie was talking about, in that our conversations with those other recommendations have everything to do with, as the tone and the continued, I guess, core of what we're trying to address with our role in the community, is to increase a sense of transparency that hasn't been there, which has really driven the accountability and the data that we've been talking about, and that the police department has provided for us, right? In making sure that there's a sense of transparency that really increases the trust among all the community members with law enforcement. And we're part of I think part of our intent in doing this is certainly it's a part of building trust between the community and law enforcement. So that transparency, that accountability, that piece is critically important. When we started having conversations about that, I think we were more than respectful in acknowledging the fact that no one's go after anyone here, and we're going to certainly respect and leave it to the law enforcement to come up with a mechanism in which that data can be gathered and produced and shared in a way that that helps us understand what is going on and how are things handled in ways that we can build more trust. Does that make sense? I mean, I think those are the conversations that we've been having along the way. Chair or Board Member Mishra, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair Salvini. This is Board Member Mishra. So our role, the way I look at it, is try to get to an equitable justice system, policing and justice system, and which is not biased. I hope that the Police Officers Association, if they put our ordinance to vote, will be accepted, but I will not be held by it. Because anytime you bring an oversight, as Marie said, a review of, especially a new review, there's going to be pushback at it. There'll be friction at it. There'll be heat at it. And people have worked in a free environment. And now what we are saying is you got to be answerable to somebody. You're being answerable to your group, but now you got to be answerable to, in a more formal way, the outside community. And so it's an improvement. And then I wish Citygate had told us in the recommendations, go take a look at City XYZ's ordinance. They have done it better. Rather than that, they just said, here are the 4 things which all of us knew. These are the 4 ways to do it, and down, out. That's no recommendation.
Thank you. Chair Salvini, calling on Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, Board Member. I just want to point out, we're in a way, we're arguing with the Citygate report when it's apparent that Citygate spent most of its time not on the CPRB, but on the police department. And if you read their main source, it's a 20-year-old article. There is much more current information out there about community police review boards. And I do think that our methodology is defensible, that it was solid to respond to the police department's version of the ordinance, to go to the community for input on the draft revision, to discuss among ourselves and as community representatives what we think is the most appropriate, and to work with staff to try to get it right. And staff I use broadly here to include the city attorneys, but also the district attorney and others who want to weigh in, and at some point the police department as well. I don't think we need to argue with Citygate about all of this, because they really didn't spend enough time on us to give us much to work with. I think we have to learn what the city commission expects from us and then go from there. And in the meantime, I think we'd be wasting more time and energy if we try to take steps without getting that clarification.
Okay, thank you, Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Gibson. So I want to go forward and thinking about and talk about next steps. But before we do that, I would like to open the floor to Mr. Watts. And Mr. Watts, you have 3 minutes to respond.
Why are you limiting it to 3 minutes, ma'am, after I've been sitting here listening to all this? What are these? It is incredible how an informal committee like play like it's huge. All right, only 3 minutes. It's ridiculous. You know, this report was written. Ms. Salvini refused to answer questions when I asked her, why did you pick the police to review the police? Are you surprised? I mean, everything that comes in from Citygate, basically, I have already told you about in many of the instances. The key thing is no standardized response time. The police department does not want a standardized response time. They want to pick and choose what they do when they do. All of this stuff in that report is incredible. In terms of the notes that I have prepared, the 8 can't wait stuff. If you will go down to, page 32 of the report, 4-1-2, 8 can't wait. Finding 9, department policy prohibits chokeholds except in instances of deadly force. So chokeholds are allowed. Now, I don't understand this concept of civility. People don't like brusque language and to the point bluntness, but you will tolerate a town that supports the choking of human beings to death. Incredible. This report focuses on the 3% of time that the police spend banging heads. The other 97% or whatever it is spent doing routine police work. Why is all of the focus on the worst case scenarios that seldom happen? Irrespective, going back to 8 can't wait. This group was supposed to opine on this 1 year ago. If you do not support the banning of chokeholds, that means you support choking people to death. I bring up the issue of wages and the way you are paid, except for Ms. Robinson, and all this partner stuff. Partners are not partners. They want to make money. They talk about the criminal justice. It's an industry. All of those guys coming in there want to figure out a way to circumvent everything your work has done. You were making progress in the first 6 months, and then you got waylaid. City staff has been working hat in hand, hand in glove with the police department to stop everything you do. It has come over and over and over again. Surely you see that. What is not existing on this committee is somebody who is willing to take the city staff to task and say, you work for us. They have lost sight. They are doing everything they can to support the police department and give them what they want. We want a valued police department in this community, but we don't want police that are able to tell you when they can come around and when they can't, when they can choke you to death and when they can't. Why don't the police say, and a key point, surely you see how disingenuous everything is simply by this 8 can't wait stuff. Read the report. The Lawrence Police Department is not consistent with 8 can't wait. And yet it's in the report saying, oh, we're just as good. Why are we not taking apart this stuff? Why are you allowing the police to dictate? What other group of civil servants in this town are able to say, well, we don't like what you're doing, and so we need to have a meeting. Stop every piece of reform possible. The police do not want change. Stop very clear that the police will change when they are given direct, blunt, to the point directives. You don't ask, you tell. I have a lot of notes here, Ms. Salvini, and I resent the fact that I am limited to have to work extemporaneously like this instead of being able to participate in those meandering questions that are going on in this committee. You've had a year to put this stuff together. They don't want an ordinance. They want an ordinance that says we'll do nothing. It's incredible. Go ahead. I would much rather, and trust me, I have volunteered to be on this committee. They don't want me on the committee. Go ahead. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. You support people being choked to death if you don't ban it. That's the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watts, for participating. Salvini, I would like to open the floor for next steps.
Tanya, Alex has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alex. Mr. Kerr?
Okay, so guess what? I actually took notes this time. Yeah, amazing. So I'm going to respond to about everything this board has said. But to the report, the final report on Citygate, I read the whole thing. It was tiring, but I was somewhat disappointed in some parts reading it. But I did like the recommendations they did say about the working group kind of. I do want to say, don't take this on Citygate. This board is advising board. You advise the city commission. To respond to Board Member Graybill, I appreciate your response to Citygate. I do not see starting over lightly or ever doing that. So to tell you that, everything I heard was right, and I loved hearing it. And I applaud this board for saying it, because this was a lot of things that this board has talked about in just, I don't know how long we've been talking, 45 minutes about this. But then for the action plan, I kind of feel like, or whenever that, I don't know, whenever the action plan gets to the city commission, maybe instead of just city community members being there, and I don't know if this is required, but for a board member to be there, maybe, just to be there. I would like to say that, because a lot of board members on other boards don't do that, and it's very disappointing when they don't come to a thing that they've been working on for a long, long time. I do want to say that the distrust issue, I do feel like is something that this board needs to figure out, or I don't know how this will get handled in a way, but my best advice is figure it out. You know what? I really just decided this right now, but this is going to be very dangerous. But Mr. Watts, don't yell at this board. Don't do it. These members are unpaid. You want to mess with this board, you're going to have to go through me. This board is great. I love advising this board. I understand with you, Mr. Watts. Hey, I'd be pissed off too. But about the 3-minute mark, hey, I got 3 minutes. Write a speech. Easy as that. Write a speech. That's all I have for that. And I do appreciate this board for working on this ordinance and the Citygate thing. It's really a lot of things coming at you, coming at this board, and the assistant city manager, Brandon McGuire, and Major, I forgot the name, sorry. But Major, I appreciate everyone who's working on this, because this is very, 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 very important to the city. And I will do anything in my power to make sure that everything on this board's agenda gets to the city commission, or finds a way to get to the city commission. This is a very important thing. I can't say that enough. It's very, very important what this board does now. The 2 years that this board really didn't do anything, okay, that was 2 years. Now it's now, and this board I know this board will do something about about everything that has been on this agenda for months. The ordinance, the Citygate stuff, the recommendations, all of that. I do also want to kind of have a question or to say about the recommendations from Citygate. I feel like this board, I understand that you don't probably want to go through all of those recommendations again. You probably already read the recommendations, but I feel like you could, and I don't even know who does this. This may just be the city commissioner or city staff that does this. I have no idea. But I think that the recommendations, I think that this board should look into very, very well. Because they do, Citygate, don't blame everything on Citygate. I think some recommendations are very, very well done. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr, for your participation. Appreciate it. Okay, going forward, let's just quickly talk about some next steps in preparation for our next meeting between now and then, or what the desire of the board is at this point. Board Member Gibson.
I'd like for us to get the staff report on our ordinance.
Board Member Gibson.
Yeah, Board Member Gibson, I'd like for us to get the staff report on our ordinance.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? I heard some of us talking about the open door to receiving feedback from law enforcement. Shall we just, how do you want to approach that? Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Murray Taylor, first I want to echo Jane's request. We've been asking for that. So,
absolutely.
I think next month that would give them more time to prepare it. And that has to happen regardless. That work has to happen regardless. So, and then on the question about soliciting comments and feedback, perhaps as the chair, you could send it out to a list that Brandon can help gather with an introduction, just like we did with the survey, and seek feedback.
Specifically on the ordinance,
And they could give us back comments for things that they see are also problematic. Why not? We can start that process now. I had assumed that would happen further down the line, though, once we actually were prepared to bring something to City Commission. And then we would have to have that vetting at that later stage. But if there's some feeling of like an impetus to do that now, we could start that process now and just sort of extend out the offer.
This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson. So I also would probably like to clarify. I know Jane said you spoke with 2 city commission members who wanted us to do the work group. So I think I would want to get some guidance from City Commission on next steps on that, like quickly if possible, just so we could start that process if that's something that we need to do.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini. You get clarification, Jenny? Is that what you're referring to specifically from the City Commission?
Yes, because Jane mentioned, and
right.
correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so just getting clarification on if this needs to happen and kind of getting that ball rolling so we can keep this process moving. And I'm not sure how to get that how to request that clarification. I don't know if Brandon, you could be a part of that. I'm not sure how that would work.
Okay. Chair Salvini, thank you. Board Member Robinson. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, Board Member. I'd kind of like to wait. I mean, I'm going to go with whatever the majority wants to do, of course, but I'd kind of like to wait on input from the police department until we have the staff's review of the proposed ordinance, because there may be things we need to change there, and it's not helpful to get feedback on a document that's still changing. And we haven't addressed the community's comments, and there may be some changes we want to make there, especially, well, in my view, there may be some we want to make there. And the other thing is, I guess I can see how asking the police department members to answer some questions or about the ordinance would be an expedient way to do it. But I think it would be better to meet in person. I just think it'd be better to have a conversation and to work through the ordinance,
Sure.
maybe line by line. I don't know, but I think that's a part of understanding each other. And I guess, I guess that's what I think.
Okay. Thank you. This is Chair Salvini, Board Member Gibson. Thank you. We'll do Board Member Taylor and Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I suggested that, but that's not what I wanted. I'm just clarify that I think we had a process that we were working through, and I thought we were fine with how we were proceeding, and that the opportunity to have that, what Citygate is calling working group, and some mechanism for feedback from the department and from the police association was going to happen, but later in the process. And then when I look back at when I was joining the board early on, I went back and I watched the city commission meetings where they created the board, and watched how that process happened. And it was, and I'm sure you all have, this is more just a general information for viewers. But in that process, there was various versions of the ordinance that were worked through and brought back to City Commission. And that there was feedback from the police association on that original ordinance. So there was a process of back and forth that I just assumed would happen in this case too, once it was before the City Commission, where there was changes made, comments were received, and so that we would be again involved in that process now that we were an actual existing board. That's the difference between when it was brought before the City Commission. So all of these things can happen. So I understand what the reasoning for the recommendation from Citygate, but I also think it's making an assumption that we're further down in the process than we were, and not with a full understanding of how the City Commission system would work in terms of reviews of ordinances.
Thank you, Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Taylor, and Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra. So I was going to suggest Major McKinley to help us in the process of seeking feedback from the police department, what he thinks, what best to go through. And again, means we have put it out for public comment. So we have received comments on both ends of the bell curve. So I don't expect anything drastically different, but they can help us with how we can get better acceptance. Again, I reiterate, this is, I'm first answerable to the community. And so I will try to move to make this an equitable criminal justice system.
Chair Salvini here. Thank you for your feedback, Board Member Mishra. I'm going to kind of summarize and see if you all may agree with this. The next step would be to receive that report from the staff with regard to the ordinance, and then also examine the work that the board has done to take the information from the feedback from the community and re-examine the ordinance, the draft ordinance that we have, and make any changes and move forward at that point. It also sounds to me like, Marie, I'm glad you brought that that point up, and I think that's a point that we need some clarification on, and perhaps in terms of getting feedback. If the city commission is looking at a process where they receive the ordinance from us as we present it, and then offer up in law enforcement, that might be one mechanism to certainly get feedback. The other certainly might be meeting, as Board Member Gibson has mentioned, and we would just need to talk about strategically when that would take place, at what point. But it sounds like we're all in agreement that our next step is really to look at our ordinance, fold in feedback from the community through the survey, as well as look at the staff report that they'll provide us in terms of our recommendations for the ordinance. Would that be accurate, Board Member Gibson?
Jane Gibson, board member. That's a pretty good reflection of my understanding, Tanya. I just wanted to say that Sanjay's suggestion is excellent, that we invite Major McKinley to maybe report to us about what he thinks, or he and his colleagues think would be the most appropriate way for us to engage the police department in a review of the ordinance. But I agree that we're not there yet. We're not ready for that.
Right.
But when we are, I think Sanjay is exactly right. It would be most appropriate to ask them as well how they think we should engage in that process.
Okay. I think that's great. I'm sorry, I have some internet issues and I didn't hear everything that you said, Sanjay. I'm sorry, but I think that sounds really good. So it sounds like for the next meeting, we really want to focus on coming to a really polished final piece that we can work with in getting some feedback from law enforcement, as well as thinking about sending it to the city commission. Would that be accurate? I'm freezing up quite a bit. I'm terribly sorry.
Marie has her hand up.
Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, and I think that well, in the meantime, between now and our next meeting, if we all could look at the various comments that we received from the community, and we had started that work of just trying to digest the survey results. But if there's things that we think would need to be changes we want to propose for the ordinance based on our understanding of some of the comments, we should bring that list, our own list, so that we can not have to meet another month to do that work. If it seems like we can make that kind of progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Marie. I think that's a great idea. All the work that we did, certainly that you all did, as a result of taking that information from the survey and thinking about how we want to work that into the ordinance, and then receive the report from the city. That would be our agenda items for the next meeting, is to go ahead and do that work. Yeah. Okay. Board Member Robinson, do you have your hand up?
No, I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. My frozen computer got you with your arm up in the air. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry for my internet service. I want them to be sorry too. Okay. So are we near the end here? What are your thoughts? I'm frozen again. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. Well, I'm going to propose that we ask you, Tanya, when you work with Stephanie and Brandon to produce our next agenda, to put the 2 items that we've discussed this evening on that agenda. And the first would be the staff report. And the second, assuming we have time for that, and I don't know that we necessarily will, would be Marie's idea for us to bring the changes that we think we need to make in response to the community feedback that we got. So that would be my suggestion, that you, Tanya, and Stephanie, working with Brandon, put those on the agenda. And then I'd move we adjourn.
Second, if that's a motion, I'm
that a motion?
seconding that.
Okay, a motion by Board Member Gibson, seconded by Mishra. Discussion. If there's no discussion, let's go for a vote. All those in favor signify with aye. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, Board Member, aye.
Board Member Graybill. Board
Bill,
Member
you're muted.
Graybill.
You're muted, Bill.
Board Member Graybill, nay.
Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra, aye.
Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson, aye.
Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, aye. Sorry. I'm just
Okay.
confused by the nay over there, if it's just to the adjournment or for the action items. So, but okay. Anyway, the sun hasn't set, folks. This is amazing.
Board Member Salvini, aye. The ayes have it. 5 in favor and 1 nay. And I am curious about the nay, Bill. Is there anything that you wish to say before we leave?
As I said at the very beginning, I think we've messed around with it long enough. It needs to go to the city commission, and if we didn't do our job, we didn't do our job, they'll let us know. That's it. I think we're doing the public a disfavor
All right.
by continuing to kick the can down the road. Thanks.
All right. All right. Thank you, Bill. All right, everyone. Have a good evening until we meet next month. Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.